Okay. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Jones. This is my colleague, Phil Cupp.
Hello.
Hey. We're really excited to see you guys here. I know it's 5 o'clock on the second day of the conference. I know you guys have been inundated with all kinds of new information today, and we really appreciate you coming. I know that there's a party going on pretty soon, and we'll try and keep it worth your while to stick around and see what we've got to say, because we actually do have some pretty interesting stuff to talk about. I specifically joined Microsoft because I knew that Windows 8 would be an amazing development experience to be part of, that we'd be developing some great technology, and we have, and I'm really looking forward to presenting it to you. Phil?
My name is Phil Cupp. I'm a developer with Microsoft. I've been with the company for about 6 years. Also really looking forward to presenting something that I had a chance to work on in Windows 8.
Cool. All right, a little bit of housekeeping. This is obviously Talk 212, Standout with Styling in your HTML app. We're not going to be taking questions directly from the audience at the end of the talk. We will be answering questions at the back of the room immediately after the talk, and we will have office hours, booth hours tomorrow that we can talk more about some of this material. But that said, let's get started. This talk is specifically going to be focusing on styling your app using CSS. You've seen the keynotes, you have the development machines in front of you, you've seen the apps, you know that Windows 8 has a very great and interesting personality that is composed of a lot of different components. There's controls, there's layouts, there's animation, which as Judson Harris reminded us yesterday is very important, and there's styling. And the things we want to talk about styling today, 3 major topics. There's the default style sheet, what it is, how you can use it. There's CSS parts and states, which is a concept that you're going to want to understand so that you can really take styling of your controls to the next level. And then there's high contrast control visuals, getting your controls to look good even when an end user puts the machine into high contrast mode. We're going to be walking you progressively over the next 50 minutes how to build an app, how to style an app in 3 separate sections. There's using the Windows 8 out-of-the-box style in your app, getting to leverage what we provide for free. There's blending your style with the Windows 8 style. And lastly, there's custom control visuals, creating them. And it's this last thing that's going to lead us to this. This is the app that we're going to be styling during the talk, building on stage. We have basically taken a template that you're going to find in the Visual Studio, and we've added our own style, our own content. We have taken the built-in controls, such as the ratings control and the checkbox control, and given them a unique style that complements the app that we've built. And we're going to be showing you exactly how to do that. So with that said, let's get started. Our first section is the Windows 8 out-of-the-box style. And first thing we want to say here is that Visual Studio templates provide a starting app that makes it easy to follow the Metro style. The Visual Studio templates are great. They provide a lot of really useful things, navigation, some starter content, some animations. We're specifically interested in the styling, the default style sheet that is linked in to every app that you get by starting with the Visual Studio template. One of the advantages of the default style sheet is that it provides good-looking styles out of the box. And more importantly, these styles are set up for touch. Unlike the native web controls that are a little bit small and a little bit difficult to hit with large fingers, like I have, the styles that you're going to find in the default style sheet are control styles that will make controls like radio button, like toggle switches, things like that, easy to touch, easy to interact with. Beyond that, there are 2 default style sheets. There's a dark style sheet, which is applied by default. We recommend that for media apps such as photos or video. And then there's a light style sheet. You can switch to that with just 1 line of code. We're going to demonstrate that in a little bit. And it's recommended for text-based apps. So let me show you what I mean. Right here is the grid template that you get from Visual Studio. As you can see, this is a dark look, dark background, light text. You can see these gray and white rectangles where you could put your own content, which could be, say, video or photos. And you can imagine that if I had some colorful photographs here, they would really pop against the black background, which is why we highly recommend this look if you're doing a media-intensive app. Alternatively, this is the split template, not the grid template, but the split template, which again, you get from Visual Studio. You can see that this is very text-heavy, and you can see that the layout of this would make it very appropriate for something like, say, an RSS reader. And you can see that when we use the light default style, that basically we get the dark text against the light background, and it looks very natural, it's very easy to read, which is why we recommend this style for text-heavy apps. So that said, let's talk a little bit more about what's in the default style sheet. First and most important thing I want to communicate to you guys about the default style sheet is that it's transparent to developers. In Windows 8, you're going to be able to go into this style sheet and see the exact instructions that we use to get our controls looking the way they do in our apps. And as you'll see later, this is something that you're going to be able to leverage to easily override the default style of Windows to customize it. Now, we can go over what is actually in the default style sheet. There's base elements such as HTML. We have styles for that. We have styles for text elements such as, say, an H1 element or a paragraph. Windows 8 has two types of controls. There's HTML controls, which you're going to find in IE and other web browsers such as checkbox, radio button, range, fairly common. You're probably used to using these. There's also Win.js controls, which are part of a JavaScript library that's going to be part of every Metro-style app that's built using HTML5 that you're going to be building off of Expression Blend or Visual Studio. This JavaScript library includes controls like a ratings control or a toggle control, and you can style that. The default style sheet provides styles for both of those types of controls. There's also some additional style classes that are built into the default style sheet that you can leverage very easily. For example, there's a text element style class. So you can take a piece of text and turn it into a title or a subtitle. And you can also take certain controls, such as, say, a regular button, and turn it into a back button.
Hey, Chris, I got a quick question for you.
Sure.
I get definitely that there's these elements that we can target, and the controls, we've got to provide styles for those.
Yep.
But what do you mean by additional style classes? How am I supposed to use those? What's the purpose of these additional things?
No, that's an excellent question. Let me show you. So this is a button, pretty easy to declare. Everybody's familiar with it. And to style this button using one of the classes that's built into the default style sheet, all I have to do is add a class that's already been defined in the style sheet. So here I've got button, I say class equals win back button, and my regular button, which is a gray rectangle essentially, gets turned into this circular glyph-based button, which you're probably somewhat familiar with based on the apps that are on your developer machines. We can do the exact same thing with text elements. For example, here's an H1 class. If I give it the win title class, and again, this is a class that's already been defined in the default style sheet, then my normal H1 style gets turned into a title class. If I wanted to do, say, a content title as opposed to a main title, then I can use the win content title class, and I get a different look. Same thing is true if I use the win content subtitle. And if you take a look at some of our templates, specifically the split template, you'll see that a lot of our content tends to be organized hierarchically. You have levels and levels of content. And leveraging these built-in classes makes it really easy to organize that content and sort of group the content at different levels. So with that, I think we're ready for our first demo, Phil.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Chris.
Sure.
Let me just switch over to the demo here, and we'll wait for it to come up for a second. Okay, so this is Expression Blend, and Chris told us that to get started, a great place to start would be with the templates. Here are those templates. There are 5 of them. Two that are probably most interesting to you, it's the grid template and also the split template. The reason why these are interesting is because they happen to come with a bunch of sample data. They've got a bunch of pages that have been wired together. That makes it easy for you to sort of navigate and explore this default style that we're talking about in a way that has been applied to two very common application patterns. So you don't have to watch me type. I've actually prepared some content already, though, and this is based off the navigation template. The navigation template comes with one page, and right here it is, the homepage.html. You can find that right here in your project under the HTML folder. And what I'm going to do over the course of the next few demos is work towards that slide that Chris showed you first. And so I think I'll start just by changing some of the content here. I'll right-click and say View Code. Takes me right to the content. And this is not WinWebApp1. In fact, this is now Contoso Surf, two awesome things together at last, the Contoso brand and surfing. I also have some content here that I have prepped, and I'll just uncomment that so you can see it. There you go, and let me just zoom in a little bit. And then pan over here. So we have this heading. We've got some paragraphs of text. We've got a link in here. We've got a rating control. If I click on it, this is one of the WinJS controls that Chris was talking about. You can tell that it's a WinJS control down here in the content because it's just a div, and it's being transformed into a control by our JavaScript libraries that are processing all these elements and looking for things like this data-win control. We also have some different elements throughout the content here that are built into the platform. They have a dedicated tag like text area. There's the input text control down here. There's also this checkbox. And so these all have a particular style. They're oversized so that they're easier to touch, like Chris was saying. And in fact, I can see, using Expression Blend, exactly what styles are being contributed to each of these elements. If I look over here at the CSS properties pane, there's this applied rules list. And I can navigate through these rules and explore, if I check this box here of view set properties only, exactly which properties are currently contributing to the appearance of the element that I currently have selected on the artboard. And these are from all the style sheets that are currently linked into this homepage.html that it's referencing and allowing me to explore here. In addition, I can also see where these styles are coming from. And so you can see right here it says on this highlighted line, uidark.css. So some of the styles are in fact coming from our default style sheet. And Chris said that I could change that with one line of code. I just want to show you where that one line of code is. It's right up here near the head of the document. It says uidark.css, and I'm just going to change that to uilight.css. And then instantly on the artboard, it updates right away so that you can see immediate feedback on the change that you've made.
That's really cool, Phil. That's the only place I have to change that, right?
Actually, it is one line of code, but it is in multiple places, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So the other place that you want to go to change this is in default.html. Now, this concept, default.html is an entry point for your application. It's the entry point markup. So its DOM is going to get loaded, and then as you navigate around the application, as you go from page to page, content like homepage is going to be loaded in to the default.html's DOM. So any of the style sheets that are there are going to apply globally to all of this content that we're loading into its content region. So arguably, this is definitely the right place to put some global style sheet like uidark. In this case, I'm going to change it here as well to uilight.css to avoid side effects at runtime. And the reason why you also see this in each of the pages that you create through our tools is because when you're in a tool like Expression Blend, you want to see this page as it will finally be rendered whenever it does get loaded into that default.html as you're editing just this page. And so in order to ensure that, you want to include all the resources that you need, your scripts, and your CSS files so that you get that final appearance. Now, the last thing that I want to show here, let me just zoom back out for a second. And, okay, maybe I'll zoom back in just a little bit. Is that I have, you can see highlighted right now, this Hawaiian Tide content. And I've used a label for whatever reason. That's how I wrote my markup. And it's a label for this following text block that you can see right here. And it doesn't have the right appearance by default, but Chris said that I could use some of these additional classes that are already in the default style sheet, that I could pull from that and then borrow their appearance to better communicate the role of this element on my page. And so here's a nice way to navigate what's a rather large style sheet with a bunch of different content in it. Is I can use this styles pane in Expression Blend, and I can do a type down search over all the style sheets that are being linked into this page. So here I type title because I happen to have seen earlier that that's applying the appearance to that Contoso surf element. And there's more than one type of title in here. There's content title, content subtitle, just like Chris was saying. This is also just a nice way to explore what styles are affecting the appearance of all of our stock controls and learn about the various states that they have and what appearance that they're going to be getting. So if I'm interested in the rating control, I type rating. If I'm interested in styles that might be contributing to the checkbox, which we'll be working on a little bit later, I type in checkbox. In this case, I'm saying title, and I think that that's a title for my content. So I've got that Hawaiian Tide content selected there. I'm just going to go into the UI, into the attributes pane, and type win-content title. And when I do that, it updates on my artboard. And so now I think I've covered all those basic concepts. We swapped the light and dark style sheets out. We showed how to pull from those additional styles, where to change those two style sheets. And so I think I'm going to turn it back over to you, Chris, and you can set us up for some more concepts.
Okay, that's great, Phil. And that was really interesting how you were able to use Expression Blend to sort of explore and analyze the default style sheet. But I'm actually a personal fan of Notepad. This is just CSS, right? I could use that, right?
Yeah, if you are a Notepad aficionado like Chris is, then everything that I'm doing in the tools through all of the demos, you can do with your favorite editor. It's just very efficient and very easy with our tools, so I highly recommend them.
Yeah?
Okay.
Okay, cool. Well, our next section is blending your style with Windows 8. And first thing we want to say here is that as Phil showed us, Expression Blend is a great tool for being able to analyze what's going on with an app, figure out where various styles are coming from. Beyond that, though, Expression Blend and the default style sheet make it easy to project your style on top of Windows 8. And there's a workflow associated with this. Let me show you what I mean. First thing we want you to do in this workflow is to add your style sheet after the default style sheet. The default style sheet is transparent. You can go in there and make changes, but we don't recommend it, in part because as updates to Windows 8 occur, there will be new versions of the style sheet. If you've made changes to the style sheet, then you're going to have to worry about taking your changes and integrating them all over again. Whereas if you have a separate style sheet, you can use the standard CSS cascade to handle the integration of your style with the new style. Beyond that, you want to use the power of CSS to modify backgrounds, elements, other features of your app. And then you're going to want to modify control parts and states to reflect your style within specific controls. So I'd like to take a quick moment here and ask the audience, how many people here would consider themselves fairly experienced CSS, HTML programmers? And how many people is this relatively new to? Okay, so we've definitely got some people in the audience to whom this is new. We should probably review some of the basics. Let's start by talking about CSS selectors and specificity. A CSS selector is an identifier that allows you to target one or more elements in your app. So for example, I can have a selector that targets all the buttons in my app. And perhaps this selector is associated with properties that says all the buttons in my app should be blue. I can also have a selector that says this particular button in my app with a specific ID should be red. And if I follow that logic, that means that I can have multiple selectors targeting the same elements. I can have a single button that's being told by multiple selectors, you're red, you're blue. So I have to figure out, is my button red, is it blue, is it purple? And the way this gets resolved in CSS is through specificity. Specificity is basically a set of rules that define which selectors win when I'm combining multiple selectors that all point to one or more elements. So there's some broad rules that we want to talk about here. First is that more specific rules win over less specific rules. So if I have one rule that says all the buttons in my app are blue, and then I have another selector that says this particular button is red, then that particular button is going to end up red because the selector that says it's red is more specific than the selector that says all buttons are blue. A selector that points at one element is, by definition, more specific than a selector that points at multiple elements. Also, if I have two selectors that are of the same specificity, for example, if I have one selector that targets all buttons and says all these buttons are blue, and then have another selector, maybe linked in later, that says all buttons are red, then rules of the same specificity are last right wins. The red button selector will win because it's linked in later, it's specified after the blue button selector. So there's more rules than just that. The W3C has an excellent spec, and I gotta say, I've been working on this for a couple of years. I still find myself consulting it because there's a lot of very complex ways that these selectors can interact with each other. Do you find yourself still looking at the spec from time to time, Phil?
Yeah, actually. Okay. I take it, though, you didn't get my memo.
I did not get your memo live on stage, Phil, no.
I thought it would be a good idea if we help the audience learn through example, and so I inserted a quiz into the deck, if that's okay with you. I thought you could help us take it.
Thank you, yes.
Okay.
Springing this on me.
No problem. You're solid. Here's the flow, is that we said as part of the workflow, we should include our own default style sheet somewhere in the markup after the default style sheet, right?
Sure.
And so I've got UILite.css.
Yep.
This is our default style sheet. It's got rules written in it here, 1 through 4. And those rules are in the order that they would appear in the UILite.css. Mm-hmm. I've got my style sheet.css. This is included in the markup afterwards. And then here's rules 5, 6, and 7 that are included in that style sheet in the order that you would have written them as an author. And my exercise for you is which of these rules comes first?
Okay. I'm going to guess number 1, because that comes first. It's easy to remember.
I think that's an excellent guess.
Yes.
Okay, number 1. The reason why it comes first is because it's just an element. It's a very generic selector part that applies to a broad set of things in your document.
Okay.
And so it's very generic. Do you know what comes next?
2.
Okay. Well, 2 normally comes after 1. But in this case, remember, it doesn't matter the order in which the rules are written. It's grouped first by specificity, and you can see there's a rule that looks exactly the same later in your document. So even though it's in the same document and it comes after in the order that you've listed in your markup, it's going to be applied before some of these other rules.
Okay. All right.
What's next?
Is it 2 now?
It is 2.
All right.
Now, in this case, we sort of jump specificity because we're starting to add more parts to our selector. Okay. Elements and pseudo-elements, very generic. Pseudo-classes, actual classes, more specific.
Got it.
And so when we add those in, it's going to come in the next group. Do you know what comes next?
Is it number 4?
It is number 4 because these pseudo-classes and classes, they're in the same bucket, and so it comes later, so it's the next one in this sort of group of specificity, if you will. And then next?
Is it number 7? There we go.
It is, in fact, number 7. And then I'll give you a hint here on this next one. It's number 3.
Okay.
And so here we have something with both elements and pseudo-classes. But as we increase the number of pseudo-classes, it's increasing the specificity of that second group. First we started with elements and pseudo-elements. Then we're on to pseudo-classes and classes, and also attribute selectors are in that group.
Okay.
And then lastly, we're left with one rule with an ID selector.
Sure.
This is the most specific. And so it comes last.
Because it's only pointing at one element.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So the point of this slide is just to illustrate that sometimes it can be a little complex to sort out exactly what rules are going to be applied in what order. But what we have coming up for you in a demo is a tip on how you can worry a little less about specificity by finding the rules in our default style sheet that you're interested in overriding, those contributing the properties that you want to change, cloning that rule, putting it into your own style sheet, which then means it has the same specificity but comes later, and so that last right will win. So there's a nice simple recipe for you to get the styles that you want.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. So as Phil was saying, I can basically go into the default style sheet because it's transparent. And I can find selectors that target the elements that I'm interested in. And I can find the properties, things like border width, border style, color, and I can take those properties and those selectors and copy them into my own style sheet. And based on the specificity rules that we just went over, I know that selectors of the same specificity are last right wins. So by copying the selectors in the default style sheet into my own style sheet, which is linked in later, I can be sure that my selectors, my properties, will override the default style sheet. So once I've done that, I can do an example here. This is a button, a simple hello button, which is styled the same way that you would get from the UI Lite style sheet. It's basic, it's functional, it's a gray box with black text. If I wanted to do something a little more imaginative, like say more of a Christmas theme, then I can, in my own style sheet, take this selector, take these properties, change them, so I've got, you know, sort of a dashed red and white feel to it with a nice curvy border radius, and I just change those properties in my style sheet, and I get this style of button. So that works fine for buttons. Buttons are fairly straightforward, divs are fairly straightforward. If I want to do something more complicated, though, like say control, then I need to use CSS parts. And what I mean by that is this is an example of a text input control. It has a border, but it also has other parts that I can target. It has a value section, and it has a clear button. And there's a concept of CSS pseudo elements. So for example, here, I've got input type text, which targets the specific control, and then I've got : MS clear, which is a CSS pseudo element that basically refers to just one specific part of the control. And then if I use this in combination with the border property, and I say, hey, I want a 2-pixel solid green border around my clear button, that's exactly what I get. I'm changing just one part of the control rather than the entire thing.
I see. So it's like you're reaching inside of a control that's built right into the platform. Now that's something new, right?
That is something new.
If I were using our web platform, I couldn't get inside these controls in this way before.
You couldn't get inside them previously. This is exactly why people previously would build complicated custom controls. But you don't have to do that now. You can change individual parts of the control while building on top of all the work we've put into building controls that are accessible and performant and all those wonderful things, right? So I can do that for parts of a control. I can also change controls based on their state. For example, if I wanted to change what this control looked like when it was being hovered over, I can use a CSS pseudo class for that. In this case, :hover. So basically, all I do is I say input type text, :hover, and that means that when the control is being hovered over, like by a mouse, for example, I'm going to change the MS clear part of it to have a purple border as opposed to a green border.
Okay. I've got just another quick question for you.
Sure.
If I put hover on the other side of MS Clear, one, is that valid? And two, does it do anything different?
It is valid. It does do something different because in this case, :hover is going to refer to whatever element it is to the immediate right of. So in this case, :hover refers to the control as a whole. When any part of the control is being hovered over by the mouse, then we're going to change our properties, our appearance. On the other hand, if I reverse the two, if I said : MS clear :hover, then hover would be referring to just the clear part of the control. So only when the clear button is being hovered over on the control would the appearance change.
I see.
All right. And of course, we can do this with HTML controls. We can also do it with the new WinJS controls we've introduced. For example, this is a date picker. It has a month part, a day part, and a year part. I can change the appearance of any individual part, but unlike with HTML controls, I'm going to use a specific class that is part of the default style sheet, and I can use that class to target individual parts of the WinJS control. So here I use the : date picker year class, and then I use a certain property. In this case, it's the green border again, and I can change just that one part of the control. And I can also, with WinJS controls, use the same CSS pseudo classes that I previously used to change it when it's in a different state. In this case, if I combine : hover with win date picker year, then I can get a purple border when that particular part of the control is being hovered over. So Here's a list of the HTML controls that you're going to find in Windows 8, and along with their associated parts. For example, we have a checkbox that has a check, and we also have a radio button that has a check. We have a range control that's quite complicated. It's got a thumb, it's got tracks, it's got tick marks. There is also a similar list for WinJS controls and their associated parts. It's a little bit long to list here, but you will find it in the documentation that we have linked to at the end of our talk. And with that, I think we're ready for our second demo, Phil.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. So there are some new concepts that Chris just introduced that I want to show you. I think what we'll do first, though, is let's just take inventory of where we are. While you weren't looking, I pulled some content out of the oven, and I have added in a list view and an ability to select some images here so that we look a little bit more like our target application. And I've also upgraded the Contoso Surf logo. This is now the official Contoso Surf logo. It has some orange to it. It's got a little wavy F in it, and that sort of wavy F also matches this element of the background that's sort of going on there with a little orange sort of swoop on the side. And so this is becoming a predominant accent color in the application for us, and so I want it to permeate our app. And I can see that if I hover over this rating control here, that these stars, they're still blue, and I like the blue, but it's not my orange. So what we're going to do is take these techniques, apply them, and then get inside the control and change their appearance. I think we can target that down here on the checkbox as well, reach inside, change the appearance of that check mark. So let's do that. I'll just quit out of that application for a second. I'm going to come back over here into Blend, and I'm going to use one of the techniques that I told you about in the last demo, which is this type-down search that lets me see all of the styles that are contributing to rating controls. And I'm just going to navigate through these here, and I'm taking a look at all the set properties. And as I navigate through, I can see that there is this WinRatingUserFull that's contributing to that blue color. And in fact, actually, I can't see the blue color anymore. And the reason why I can't see the blue color on the control I'm talking about over here on the artboard is because the app wasn't really running. But Expression Blend actually has this neat feature that you can go into interactive mode. And I'll do that right now by clicking this little blue mouse pointer to turn on interactive mode. Now my app is actually running. I'm going to go ahead and interact with it and freeze it in a state that was similar to what we saw when I was using the app for real. I'll go ahead and turn on the check mark as well. And then I can come back out of interactive mode, and now it's sort of frozen in this state that is interesting to me for my styling. And so if I sort of browse through these again, I can see now also via this rule scope adorner feature in Blend which elements I'm actually talking about as I select these various rules. And by rule scope adorner, I mean this little green box that's showing up on the artboard, which I can turn on and off right down here. Okay, so this is the rule that I'm interested in. I also know, because I've given this demo more than once, that this WinRating tentative full style is also contributing a color, and it's when I'm hovering over the rating control, tentatively thinking about committing some particular rating. So in this case, we're using CSS classes for one of our WinJS controls to represent a particular state of the control as well. So what I want to do is clone these rules, and then override them. And I'm going to do that here just by copying this selector, so I'm sure that I have the same specificity. And now I need a place to put my new rule. And what we said is that the workflow was create a new style sheet that's going to come after this style sheet in the markup. And then you can include it and put your new style there. And fortunately for my demo, there's one that comes with every page. It's default.css. When you create a new page, this is a global style sheet that we're linking into each page that you can use for overriding your styles. I'm going to put it in this global style sheet because I want to change the appearance of this control everywhere.
And
if I wanted to...
How do we know that it comes after the default style sheet?
Oh, that's a good point. Actually, without even opening up the markup, Blend is listing these for me in the order that they actually appear in the markup. So I know that default comes after UI dark.
Okay, makes sense.
Right, so anyway, I have that selector on my clipboard. I'm just going to click this plus to add a new rule, and then I'm going to paste it in here. I also know that I'm looking to clone that tentative rule, so I'm going to paste this again. And I'll just go ahead and make this two selectors on the same rule so that it can apply to both sets of elements. And then now what I need to do is change the color property because that is what I'm interested in overriding. So I'm just going to search for it here using this type down feature. And I'll go ahead and use the eyedropper because I want it to exactly match my, I want it to exactly match my awesome orange color. Looks like I missed it there. Hang on one second. Here is my rule. Here is my color. And let's go with the eyedropper, and let's pick it one more. Okay, there. So I have my orange. This is the color that I'm going for so that I can blend in that aspect of my logo. And then now I want to do the same thing, but with an HTML control instead. So it's the same process. Right here it is. This is the checkbox. And this time, instead of using classes to help me get inside the control and style one of its particular states in this case, I'm going to target a part, and that part is MS Check. And so you saw a big list of these parts, and we have various parts and various controls. Some of them have more than others. In this case, the checkbox has one part, the check part, which is containing the check glyph. And so if I do a search, I can find the rule that's of interest to me here. I'll just navigate through and look for something that has the color set. Here's the dark gray that I'm seeing for this particular check mark. And so this is the rule that I'm looking to clone. And this also has more than one selector in it. I'm just interested in changing the styles of the checkbox, so I'm just going to copy this one rule, do the same thing here to add that rule into my default style sheet. And now I'll go ahead and set the color, then save that for me. So there I go. So now I've got a check mark that is orange. I've got the rating control, which is orange. Lastly, just to finish it off and pick up the link colors that I want and so forth, I'll use one last feature here to link in a style sheet that I've already prepared. And so now we're looking pretty orange. All right, so I'm happy with that, and I'll turn it back over to you to see where we can go next.
Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's really great how quickly we can use Blend to really quickly go through, target the areas of the app that we're interested in changing, and just boom, 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 get them out of the way. But we don't have to stop with just taking check marks and changing the color. We can introduce custom visuals for your style, for controls. So what I specifically mean here is that Windows 8 supports new styling capabilities that allow you to have custom control visuals. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Phil, I know you like surfing. Have I told you about my idea for a surfing-themed first-person shooter?
You might have mentioned it. I think it sounds like you'll sell a lot of those.
I think so, yeah. I mean, you get to ride around on a surfboard, shoot sharks, it'll be great. But, you know, I need custom artwork for it. So we have the default checkbox, and it looks good, and I can say give it a green border if I want. But I kind of want to take it one step further. I don't want the existing check mark. I want my own artwork, like something based on a controller, for example, and I want this to go outside the box. I really want to change how this control looks. And using the CSS parts and state stuff that we previously discussed, I can do that. So for example, if I have input type checkbox :checked, which is a pseudo class, I can say, I want to introduce this particular background image, it's a custom SVG image that I've created, when the checkbox is checked. So when the checkbox is checked, I get my image, which is great, right? Well, maybe not so much, because here I've got the checkbox, I've got my custom artwork, but the old style is still there. It's still interfering with the look I want to have. So I need to take one more step. What I want to do is I want to target the old checkbox, which again I can do with a CSS pseudo element, and I want to set that to transparent. I want to make it disappear. So what I'm doing here is I'm introducing my own artwork, I'm removing the old artwork, and once I've done that, I get a checkbox that when checked looks exactly the way I want it to. It's my custom artwork, and it looks good. It goes outside the box. I mean, I can really change the appearance of the control. So that's a good start. But there's something else I got to remember. I need to make my control visuals, my custom control visuals, accessible. So for example, let's take a look at high contrast mode. High contrast mode is going to take place when we have a visually impaired user who wants to focus only on the actual content of an app, right? And normally this is fine. Basically, we get put in sort of, say, a white text and a black background, and it really does improve the contrast of the app. But it's going to do things like remove a background image, and this is problematic when I have, say, another custom control, such as my custom ratings control, where I've replaced the stars with like bullet holes, right? Because it's a first-person shooter. And if I use the mechanism that I previously showed, then I'm using background images for the custom artwork. The problem is, as I just said, in high contrast mode, those background images get removed because traditionally background images have been sort of adornment and not a core part of the content. But in my case, if you remove the custom background images, the control disappears entirely and it becomes unusable. It's invisible. That's no good.
Oh, good.
So how do I get around that? Well, I get around it through the use of a media query. Just as a reminder, for those of you not familiar with CSS, a media query is a piece of logic in a style sheet that essentially says, I want these properties to be applied when the machine, when the app is in a certain state. So in this case, I have a high contrast media query, and these styling rules get applied when the app is in high contrast mode. So what I'm doing now is I'm going back and I'm using background image again to implement my custom artwork. But in this case, I'm able to use different high contrast artwork that is specifically designed for high contrast mode, bullet hole, hc.svg, right? And when I do that, then I can have different artwork. And in this case, I've got my black and white high contrast bullet holes for my rating control, which looks great, and I'm very happy with it. There's one more thing we can do. SVG elements can be directly styled for high contrast too, because at the end of the day, SVG elements are just XML, and CSS will apply to SVG. So if that's the case, you think we could give it another demo?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Okay. So just switching over to the demo here. So this is just leaving off exactly where we left off from demo 2. And what Chris said was that our first step here is getting the existing visuals out of the way so that we can apply our custom imagery. So I'm going to use the same concept that I showed you in the previous demo, where I can type in rating. But this time, instead of cloning rules, I prepared a few just so that you don't have to watch me type as much. So here's one that targets a particular state. I want to get rid of these, and I think I'm going to do it with color. So I'm going to set this custom expression to transparent. I might type that a few times, so I'll copy it. And then those visuals disappear. So now those are out of the way.
So I do have one question, Phil. I mean, I'm familiar enough with CSS to know that I could make the visuals disappear by saying color equals transparent, but I could also do display none, I could do visibility is hidden. Is there some reason I should prefer one over the other?
Yeah, really, it's because of the high contrast concern that you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And so what happens is when you go into high contrast mode, our web platform, it does this auto coloring for you. And what it does is remove the background visuals and also ignore the colors that are being specified by the author on things like the foreground text and the border colors, etc., so that it can pull from the user's specified system settings to ensure that they can see the content that they're after.
Okay.
So in this case, if I use color to turn off the existing visual, and I'm about to apply some custom image as a background image of my own, if I let this auto coloring take place then by getting rid of my custom image and ignoring my transparent color, I basically undo the work that I'm about to do and I get back to the original visuals. So instead of having it disappear like it did with your bullet hole example when you set the content property to none, it's going to just sort of revert to its original appearance.
Okay, cool.
And so I get high contrast for free.
That makes sense.
And so that's why we're going to use color. And so now let's do the same thing, but we're going to apply it to the empty state here also. Okay, so those are out of the way. Now what I need to do is apply my custom artwork. So I'm going to type background image, and I have prepared some art for us. It's in my images folder. And for the empty state, it's called ratingwave_empty.svg. There we go. Okay, and so I got a wave there. We're on the right track. Now I want to do the same thing for the full state. Also in my images folder, rating wave, oops, a little typo there. Rating wave filled for the filled state.svg. There we go.
Cool.
So that's the look that I'm looking for the rating control. Now let's do the same thing for our checkbox. Right, so I'll do the same concept up here. I'll type in checkbox. I also have some rules that have been prepared here. And so first, I think what I'll do actually is apply the background image. And so once more, in my images, this time I've got check mark. I don't know if you can remember, but we had that hang loose sign back at the beginning.
Cool.
So I'm going to use hang loose as my check mark here. And when I apply that, you can see this is exactly what Chris was talking about, is that it's competing with the visual. So one is overlapping. And so one of the significant new capabilities that you have by addressing just these parts is that sometimes you can use them now to just get our styles out of the way and apply these custom images in a way that lets you take the controls much further. So now what I need to do is just set the color on this one as well to clear it. And I think we'll be pretty much at parity with your original slide. Let's run it and take a look. Okay, so here it is. Here's some cool images. I like this one right here. I think that I'll give that 4 waves and say...
Hang loose.
All right, because
Cool.
I'm a super cool dude, and I want to know when new photos or videos are added. So here we are.
Yep.
And I said also that I'm going to get high contrast for free, so I think that we should test that out.
Yep.
And I'll show you how you can test that out. You can come right into the control panel here. And there's this section called Ease of Access. And I can just slide this little toggle control over to on, and I'm in high contrast. Now I'm ready to pop back over here to my app. And sure enough there, I have the original visuals. It was no work on my part. And so that's pretty good.
I think it needs something. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I kind of missed the wave, though. I like the wave.
I missed the wave, too. Okay. I put a lot of work into that wave.
All right.
And so we can bring our custom artwork back in high contrast, but I can't use the original artwork. If I did, then it would have all these colors in it that aren't really honoring the user settings. And so what I want to do is go in there and actually modify that SVG. And let me just show you how to do that quickly. I'm going to pop over here to the desktop, and this is just a shortcut that I've set up that goes right into the images folder in my project. And here's one of the SVG files. I'll just open it up in Notepad. So it's markup, it's XML, and it looks a little complicated because I've got this big complex path in here. I used the tool to create it, of course, but I can also edit it by hand so that I can do a little massaging to make sure that this is going to be ready for high contrast. And you may or may not have known this, but you can put actually CSS and even a style block with selectors right inside of your SVG. So here I'm using this pound wave selector to give a fill to this particular path element. So I use the ID, wave, and then I use this system color keyword, button highlight. So we have system color keywords built into the web platform that automatically tie to all the user's preferences for high contrast. And by saying button highlight here, then my user will know that this is something that they could interact with like a button. It will have the right color so they can press on it, tap on it, or click on it with their mouse and set their rating. So now what I need is just a way that I can get this to apply in my project. And so I can use this other concept that you introduced, which was media queries. And I actually have that prepared right here in my CSS. And so what this media query says is that when we're in high contrast mode, this can also accept an argument, by the way, in case you have some artwork that's like light on dark. You can say, is this white on black, or is it black on white, or is it something else custom that the user has created? But if I don't supply any arguments to this, then it just says, whenever I'm in high contrast mode, then I want these rules to apply. There's 2 rules in here, and both of them say that I want to target the elements that are identified by this selector and set the MS high contrast adjust property to none. Normally it's auto, which means it's doing that auto coloring for us. If we say none, though, it says, I know what I'm doing as an author. I'm in control. So don't strip off my background images. So it's now safe for me to apply that in both of these cases, and I should see my custom visuals again. And because this time I'm using that _HC version of my SVG, then I ought to be able to pull from those system colors and get something that's in high contrast. So let's go ahead and run this once more.
Okay.
Actually, I think I'll just need to drop out of it first before I relaunch it. I'll run it once more, and here we are. So now we've got our custom artwork with some minimal effort brought back right into our high contrast mode as well.
Very cool. We got the wave back.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
The wave.
So I've got one more thing that I just wanted to point out here is that in this awesome Contoso Surf app, you can also upload video.
Not just pictures.
Not just pictures. And so there was this one guy who decided to mount some type of surfboard camera. It's a pretty cool device. And so here he is rocking out on his surfboard. And what I wanted to just point out for you is that here we've got, this is rating control, and it's got some styling that it's being used as a video scrubber with a little bit of JavaScript. Mm-hmm. You can see like the tick marks, for example, are gone, so a little bit of a custom style. Here it is again in this vertical orientation so that we can control the volume. Of course, we've got some buttons here as well. And so by mixing in some of these controls with a little bit of JavaScript, you can not only change their appearance, but you should just start thinking about new ways in which you could use the controls themselves to save you some work.
Wow, that's really cool, actually. I was thinking along those lines myself. I mean, here, for example, is a collection of the HTML and WinJS controls that you're going to find in Windows 8. And this is their default appearance. It's uniform, it's very functional, but it may not necessarily reflect the style that people really want to have for their app. So what I can do is, using the techniques that we've just covered, I can change their appearance to be much different, much more colorful, much more in line with the style of the app that I want to build. You know, we can go back and forth, see how that works. And as Phil just said, it's not just about changing how they look. It's once you've changed how they look, you can also think about using them in new and innovative ways. I mean, Phil just showed us a range control that's used as a scrubber for a web video. We could probably do something really crazy, like use checkboxes to build Minesweeper, or use radio buttons to build tab controls. And basically, we're just leveraging the power of the platform along with custom visuals to do something really great with our apps. And I think that's about as far as we can go with styling in this talk, but I don't think it's as far as the audience can go with these techniques. I think you can take them for a really long way and do some really amazing stuff. And I think we're looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with. Toward that end, quick recap. We just focused on styling your app using CSS. We talked about the default style sheet, what it is and how to use it. We talked about CSS parts and states. We talked about high contrast control visuals. And over the course of about 50 minutes, we started from a default template and went all the way up to a styled app. There's some related sessions that you might want to take a look at. Some of these have already occurred, but they should be accessible on Channel 9. Creating Metro-style apps with built-in controls, creating adaptable layouts for different sizes of screens, different orientations. There's Standout with styling and animation in your XAML app, which is the XAML equivalent of this talk, if you want to learn how to use XAML to do a lot of the stuff that we just showed you how to do. There's lots of further reading and documentation you can take a look at. There's samples, there's a developer forum, there's documentation which references some of the earlier things that I was talking about as far as a list of WinJS controls and parts. And I think that's it. I'd like to really encourage people to send in feedback, positive or negative. We want to hear what you think of our talk. This is Talk 212, and I think that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.